Hey you guys, and welcome to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over 21 drugstore bronzers that I've tried out. These ones I have a very strong opinion on whether it's best, meh, or worst bronzers that I've ever tried, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the formula and the color of these. So if you want to see all my thoughts on these 21 drugstore bronzers, then just keep on watching. So for every product that I've ever had, I keep a detailed note about what I like about it, what I don't like about it, things about the texture, wear time, stuff like that. So even if I get rid of it, I'll remember those kinds of things. Actually, most of these products I don't have anymore because bronzers are one of the hardest things for me to find that work with my skin tone. I have a very warm yellow sort of undertone, and for some reason lots and lots of drugstore bronzers just don't have that golden warm undertone, and so they just don't look right on me. And if I do find a color that works for me, it's usually that I don't like the formula, or it doesn't wear very well, things like that. Things that can happen to a bronzer on my skin tone is that it can pull red or pink toned, it can turn gray or purple toned, or it can look way too orange. So I think most people know that a lot of the time bronzers can pull really orange toned, but on my skin tone all those things happen, purple, gray, and orange, and so those are all things that I have to worry about when I'm looking at a bronzer. Now for the best bronzers at the drugstore, my favorite, my all-time favorite, is the Maybelline City Bronzer in the shade 200. This bronzer has a very slight shimmer to it, but it's not detectable at all on the skin, so I don't really like very shimmery, shiny kind of bronzers, so this one I really like because you can't really tell, even though it has very slight shimmer in it. It has a very soft and buttery texture. It doesn't really kick up powder when you put your brush into it, and it blends very, very well due to the texture. I would say that this is medium pigmented. It's not super pigmented, but it's not like no pigment, and that's what I really like because it's easy to build it up on the skin, but it doesn't have like a really intense pigmentation right when you put it on, so that it's hard to blend out or anything like that. So this is just a really perfect product to me, and it has like a very like tropical kind of smell. If you are sensitive to smells, you might want to be aware of that. The thing that I love most about this is the color. I tan very easily, and when I tan, my forehead tends to get a little bit darker, and this is the exact color that it turns. So I love this bronzer because it is a very natural color on me. It's sort of golden toned, and it just looks very natural when I wear it as a bronzer. And this is what I have as bronzer on right now, so if you can see, it just looks very natural. So this is my favorite bronzer at the drugstore and my favorite bronzer overall. The next bronzer is actually a foundation. It's this Maybelline Fit Me Shine Free Foundation Stick in 330 Toffee. This I've used pretty much all the way up. So even though it says that this is a shine free foundation stick or whatever, it doesn't really have like a matte finish. So I always have to set this with powder just because it will sink into my forehead lines if I don't do that. And this actually has a very similar tone to this. They both have that golden undertone, but this one's a little bit darker than the first one. The next bronzer that I have is the Sephora bronzer in Los Cabos Medium 3. But this is actually what I use as a contour because it has sort of like a gray undertone to it, but it's, for some reason, it just works really well with my skin tone. So this bronzer is very soft. It doesn't kick back powder when you put your brush into it, and it's not super pigmented, but it's just pigmented enough, and you can build it up to be pretty pigmented. So sometimes this powder can be a little bit hard to blend, but I use a brush like this that's sort of domed on top, and I just take a little bit and I press it into my cheekbones right here. And then I put bronzer on top of my forehead and down onto my cheek, and it just blends in really well and it looks really natural. The next bronzer I'm going to talk about I don't actually have with me, and that is the e.l.f. Primer-Infused Bronzer in Forever Sunkissed. This bronzer, it was pretty pigmented, but it wasn't overwhelmingly pigmented. It had a very slight kickback of powder, but it wasn't overly powdery, and just the perfect amount came off on the brush. The reason that I got rid of this one was that the color was a little bit too red for me, and it was wearable, but it just wasn't the most perfect color that I'd had. The next bronzers that I wanted to talk about are the Wet n Wild Makeup Stick Concealer and Contour in Where's Walnut and Oaks on You. So this is a contour stick cream sort of deal, and it's actually a very stiff and non-greasy texture, so you just can draw it onto your face and then blend it in with a brush, and it will stay in place. You don't even have to really set it with a powder, but you can just to be safe. This bronzer I really liked because it was pigmented, but you could blend it really easily into your skin because it was a cream product. I also liked it because it was a stiff texture in a cream product without being unblendable, and it wasn't so slippery and slidey that you couldn't that it wouldn't stay in place. But I got rid of both of these because the cap split in half when I pushed it down, and they also weren't the exact perfect shade for me, so that's why I didn't repurchase them. The color Where's Walnut is a little bit cool and it's pretty good for contouring, and the color Oaks on You is a little bit too orangey for me, so that one I didn't really like too much. This next bronzer I do still have. It's the Rimmel Stay Matte Powder in the shade 16 Deep Beige. This one has a very, very nice formula. It's super soft to the touch, and it doesn't kick back any powder when you put your brush into it. And this one is a very, very light bronzer, and that's actually why it's not my favorite of all time. And I think that I'm going to actually purchase this in a little bit deeper of a shade because it's just a little bit too light for me. But this one has a very nice formula and it doesn't look too pink or gray on my skin tone. I just think that it should be a little bit darker of a shade for me. And this last bronzer is the Wet n Wild Color Icon bronzer in the shade Sunset Striptease. This bronzer has a very nice and buttery formula. It actually has a little bit of shimmer in it, but it's not super detectable on your cheeks. You can tell that it sort of has like a shimmer to it, but it's not like distinct glitters. So I actually really like that. It's also not too pigmented right off the bat, but you can really build it up, which is something that I like. This shade is a little bit too light for me. It's right here. I don't know if you can even see it on my hand. But this one, I would like to try it in a different color, but I'm not super optimistic that the other shades aren't going to be gray or purple, because I know the darker that you get in bronzer shades, the more likely it is to be like orangey purple sort of shades, and this one doesn't pull purple or orange at all, but it's just a little bit too light for me. The next category of bronzers is actually the matte category. It's not bronzers that I absolutely love, but it's not ones that I like really hate and would never wear. They're bronzers that I might wear if I was like really needed to have a bronzer and I couldn't use any of those that I just mentioned. My first matte bronzer is the Physicians Formula Butter Bronzer in the shade Bronzer. I know that this is so many people's absolute favorite bronzer, but on me it looked very purple and gray, and it just did not look right on my skin tone, even though it wasn't like the light bronzer shade. I know that they've come out with several darker shades since, but they still look a little bit light for me. But the formula of this was very blendable, and I really liked the formula. It's just that the color didn't work out for me. The next matte bronzer is the Neutrogena Healthy Skin Blends Natural Radiance Bronzer in 30 Sunkissed. This one had a very nice and soft texture, and it was really blendable. It didn't kick back too much powder, but it was just a little bit too orangey pink for me, and that's why I didn't like that one. Then the next sort of bronzer type of product is the e.l.f. Foundation Palette in Medium Dark. So it's like a little palette that has 4 foundation shades in it, and the medium dark one had ones that could work for me as a bronzer. They actually had very nice golden tones, which I really liked on my skin, but they had a very greasy texture, and even when I set them down with powder, it didn't really stay in place, and it sort of creased even though I had set it with powder. So that's why I didn't really like that one, but I really did like the colors of that. But the formula wasn't my favorite. The first bronzer that I did not like from the drugstore was the Wet n Wild MegaGlo Contour Palette in the shade Caramel Toffee. This one had a yellow setting powder on one side and the dark contour shade on the other side. This one I didn't like because the powders were very, very dry. They kicked back a lot when you put your brush into it, and they were just very patchy and hard to blend on my cheeks. And the bronzer shade was just a little bit too dark of a color for me. The next bronzer that I didn't like from the drugstore was actually a blush, and that was the Nyx HD Blush in the shade Taupe. This one was way too cool toned purplish for me, and that's why I didn't like that one. I know that a lot of people love that for contouring, but just for my skin tone and my like warmth of undertones, it just didn't work at all. Another bronzer that was the worst one at the drugstore was the Milani bronzer in XL Fake Tan. This one had 2 sides to it as well. One of the sides was like a dark contour sort of cool tone shade, and the other one was like a bronzier shade. The cool toned contour shade was way too purple on me, and the bronzer shade of this one actually looked like it would be the perfect amount of warmth and the perfect undertone for a bronzer shade, but it actually turned out that only the top layer was that color, and the top layer scratched off to become this like cool toned color that really didn't work for my skin tone. Next is the NYC Smooth Skin Bronzing Face Powder in the shade Sunny. This one had a pretty nice texture too, but it just wasn't warm enough. It was too purple cool tone for me. The next bronzer is the Physicians Formula Shimmer Strips in the shade Vegas Strip / Light Bronzer. This one was just way too shimmery for me. I think that it was meant to be either eyeshadows or a bronzer, but it was just way too shimmery for me, and it just did not look right at all on my skin. Then I have another cream product. This one was the Jordana Sculpt and Glow Creamy Contour Stick in the shade Deep. This one I was really excited to use because it seemed like it would have a really nice texture to it, but actually the texture was super dry and it was like way too hard to blend out for me. So I didn't like that one because even though it wasn't going to move around on my face throughout the day, I just couldn't get it to blend in and look nice. It just ended up looking patchy even though it was a cream product. That one was also way too cool toned and purple toned on my skin. The next two bronzers that I tried were the L'Oreal True Match powders. I tried the shades C6 and W8 as bronzers, and these ones had a very dry and powdery texture too. They had a very similar texture to the Wet n Wild contour little circle with the two colors on it. These powders were very dry and powdery and they were way too pigmented. I think that a lot of the times we think that the more pigmented that something is, the better, but actually when you put something on your cheeks that's very pigmented, it can be really hard to blend it out and it ends up looking patchy when you try to blend it out. So this one, it was a very soft and fine powder, but because it was so dry of a texture and because it was so pigmented, it was really hard to get it to look smooth and natural on the face. The shade C6 was way too dark for me, and the shade W8 was a pretty good bronzing shade, but it was a little bit too dark as well. The next bronzer that I tried was the Beige Cosmetics Brilliance Bronzer in the shade Coco Cutie. This one was actually the darkest shade of the three bronzer shades that they had, which I'm not sure why I picked that one, but it ended up being way too red toned for me, and it also had a very dry and powdery texture that was way too pigmented, so it ended up being really patchy when I tried to blend it out, and the color was just all wrong. The last powder that I tried was the ColourPop Bronzing Compact in the shade Afternoon Delight. This one was also very soft and powdery, and it kicked up a lot of powder when you put your brush into it, and it was also very pigmented, so it ended up being very patchy when I tried to put it on my face, and it pulled very red toned and very pink toned on my skin, so that's why I didn't like that one. So those were all of the bronzers that I've tried at the drugstore. As you can see, there are a ton of them that I've tried out, but a lot of them didn't work either because the formula was something that I didn't really like or didn't really work well with my skin, or more likely than not it was the color that didn't work for me. So a lot of bronzers at the drugstore tend to pull red or pink on me, purplish gray on me, or orange. So that's why I didn't like a bunch of those bronzers, is because they ended up looking a little bit odd on my skin tone and not like a natural bronze. But I think that bronzers, especially for whatever reason, look a lot different on your skin tone depending on what your undertone is. So I have a very yellow warm undertone, and if you have that same undertone as I do and you have the same like depth of skin tone, like light medium sort of skin tone, then I think that you would really like the bronzers that I mentioned in the best category. But if you have a different undertone than me, like if you have a more neutral undertone or cool undertone, just keep in mind that these might look a lot different on you than they do on me. But no matter what your skin tone is, I think that having a bronzer with a good formula is really important. So just keep in mind which bronzers I said have a really dry, powdery kind of formula that ends up looking patchy on your cheeks, because I think that those ones, no matter what undertone your skin is or what depth of shade your skin is, I think that those ones won't end up looking good on you just because the formula isn't right. So that is it for my roundup on my 21 drugstore bronzers that I've tried. I hope that you guys found this helpful. There are a lot of things to consider when you're choosing a bronzer. It's the color, it's the formula, it's the wearability and things like that, but hopefully this video was helpful to you for figuring out what might or might not work for your skin tone or for your taste in bronzers. So if you did enjoy this video and you did find it helpful, please give it a big ol' thumbs up down below and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. Leave down in the comments below what else you would like to see or any comments that you have about this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.